Hey everybody, thank you once again for joining me for another episode of Unstoppable You podcast with your host, me, Heather Beebe. I have a really amazing guest for this unique episode, which is not being recorded live, as you know, but I do have some questions that some of you have been sending in, and I will get to those later in the podcast. Again, and this is also being released. Normally I'm a live podcast Monday evenings. This was a special episode I wanted to bring you. Kind of challenging to get live specifically at that time due to the nature of the job that this woman does. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. But before we get started, I want to announce a few things. As you know, I've been keeping you posted on the retreat I have coming up June 6th. Again, I'm keeping an eye on the safety of everything, obviously the legalities of should we be allowed to do it, whatnot. I am still going to have it at this point. If anything changes, I will keep you posted. I do have a couple of spaces still available. If we do have to change it to the fall, that will be announced closer to the day of. That's in June 6th in Taberg, New York, up at the Fallbrook Stable. It's going to be a wilderness and equine retreat. So super excited to get out there. Certainly won't have any trouble social distancing in Taberg, New York. So another thing too, one of the things I've added to Unstoppable You while this has all been going on is my book club. And right now we are reading this first one, Everything is Figure Outable. This book is really good. You probably hear me curse quite a bit when I'm doing my podcast or whenever. She's awesome. She's super chill and she has a great message in her book if it's something you're interested in. Another thing is next month will be You're a Badass. And this is a free group to be in. Feel free to hop in. It's on my Facebook page. If you're interested, just message me and I'll share that as well. Lastly is the Coffee with a Coach program that I've been doing, where I have given my mornings every morning to people who just want to pick my mind on whatever issues they see happening, whether it's something in your life, in your business, if you need some help around even social media marketing, anything that you're interested in discussing. I have my mornings totally open for that. It's an hour on me, and just let me know. We'll get you my schedule and we'll start having a conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Jarvis, who is a nurse practitioner down in New York City at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Hospital, which is a pretty well-known place. So welcome, Jennifer. And I really appreciate you taking the time, which I know you don't have much of, to do this with me. So,
Yeah, busy.
What?
Has been very busy.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk a little bit about your story before any of COVID came. I mean, even your decision to become a nurse, like what was you've done quite a few things actually to get yourself a solid education. I feel like before you are doing, what you're doing now, what were some of the reasons behind that? Like,
I always really wanted to be a nurse. I ended up pursuing lacrosse and playing Division I lacrosse. I couldn't really also pursue nursing in school. So I went to University of Delaware. I actually got a health and physical education degree. Fell in love with the health aspect of that and the whole teaching aspect also. At that time, I ended up taking a collegiate coaching job. I worked towards my MBA and realized I really liked the finance of the healthcare market too. And that kind of drove me into the pharmaceutical market for Eli Lilly. And that's really where I saw that my passion was for nursing. I was selling drugs and helping people, but I wasn't really able to see the patients getting better. I was just outside of the office and kind of in my suit and trying to market things. But so that's when I decided to leave pharmaceutical sales and pursue nursing at NYU in Manhattan. I worked on an acute care floor for about 6 years, and then I finally became a nurse practitioner. And I work in the critical care department and basically surgical ICU and PACU.
Okay. Yeah, so just to get people to understand a little bit, like titles of the areas you're describing, like acute care, for example, explain the differences in those departments and what's going on in those areas, just to have clarification for people.
So, first and foremost, my heart was always with oncology patients. So when I decided to become a nurse, I had automatically applied to Memorial Sloan Kettering. And I've been there ever since. The oncology population just seems to be a very unique, specialized area, but the patients there are very vulnerable and going through more than anyone could really imagine. And so I felt like that was the best population for me to really follow my passion in helping people. The acute care floor was kind of a step down. It was a mix of medical and surgical patients, but they were of the sickest. And so they weren't critical in the sense where they needed high intense care, but they were sick enough to have more of a high rapid flow of patient care. So I learned a lot between surgical and medical patients in the oncology population, between head and neck surgical patients to medical patients within melanoma sarcomas. The floor I started on had a lot of sarcoma patients, which happened to be a young population. And sometimes the prognosis isn't always great. So a lot of palliative care, comfort care conversations would occur. And I really found my passion on that floor because I was able to really help patients that were of the sickest. And as time went on and time progressed, I kind of went into the surgical area because I kind of needed a break from the medical side. Although my patients are in the critical care department right now and in the postoperative setting, it's a little bit of a different environment. It's more intense. The nursing ratios are 2-to-1. But some of the patients, do really well. A lot of them do really well, and they're recovering from a big surgery. So it's a different type of nursing. It's a different type of connection with the patient in the job that I'm in now. So.
Sure. Yeah. Is it something you always imagined yourself doing, or truly wasn't until you were exposed to like the health and wellness by being in physical education?
I think I always had a passion towards health, being an athlete and helping others. At a young age, I saw my grandma very sick and I took care of her. And I think my passion just kind of fell towards the most vulnerable populations. When I was a health and phys ed teacher, I did love teaching. And I think one day I'll end up pursuing teaching in the medical field as a nurse. But I truly love the bedside right now, and I love being with patients, and I couldn't see myself doing anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So bringing it till today, what are some of the largest changes I think that you would say you've seen, pre-COVID, after COVID?
So Memorial Sloan Kettering is a unique hospital. It's a specialized hospital. It's very different in the sense that our hospital is driven a lot by surgery and a lot by treatment, versus some other hospitals have ERs and people are coming in off the street for multiple comorbidities or trauma or cardiac issues. Where at Sloan, it's not always, that's not the case. We have a very specialized population. So prior to COVID, we were very busy with our surgeries in the PACU and the surgical ICU. We were extremely busy with chemotherapy treatments. We're expanding our hospital across Long Island, New Jersey, and parts of Pennsylvania, which is an amazing thing because we're able to help people who are not in Manhattan. So life before COVID started to kind of pick up in that sense because we were opening up so many satellite facilities. It was busy, always busy actually. And we thought that it couldn't get any busier. And then when COVID started to happen, we were anticipating it, but we were kind of conflicted in what was going to happen. There were so many different mixed messages, of which I'm sure everyone feels on the media and everything.
Sure.
But our departments have really helped us become prepared for this as time went on. As COVID started to roll in, I think
When would you say it started to roll in for you?
We started hearing word about it December-ish, February. And then I would say really by the end of February, March, we started to really ramp up, like in terms of being prepared, having some meetings here and there. But then I would feel like, the first or second week we started to get actual patients. Our hospital was different. Our patients may live in New Jersey. And
I know personally people from up here in Utica, that actually have sought care there. So you're looking at like a 4.5, 5 hour drive. So
exactly.
Imagine you're very wide. Yeah.
Exactly. So if someone started to develop COVID symptoms, we were finding a lot of our patients were going to their local ERs. So we kind of had a slower trickle effect than our neighboring hospital, New York Presbyterian, which have done a great job also, but they've definitely seen COVID in a different light than Sloan, but we've all seen it in our own way. So I think we had a slower trickling effect, if that makes sense, because of our patients were so, the demographic of our patients are so much broader than just the immediate ERs in the city. And then in addition, we found that a lot of our patients, because they were so nervous, because they're an immunocompromised population that would be staying home anyway. Like they were very, very cautious, more so than the average person who didn't feel as much of a threat because they weren't as immunocompromised. So again, our trickle effect was a little bit slower than most because our patients were just so nervous. And that's not like pure data, but that's what we've kind of assumed. So our experience was a little slower. Then I would say mid-March, we started to prepare down the pipeline. Some of the things that we did was we utilized our ORs. So in order to have enough ventilators, which was always a concern of every hospital, we made our ORs into a potential ICU. So we could use those ventilators in the ORs. They're anesthesia machines, so they're run a little bit differently than your regular ventilator in a critical care department or on a floor. But we were ramping up for that. So the ORs were completely revamped to make sure that we could utilize them as a regular room, which was pretty amazing. They did it really quickly. They were able to put video cameras outside the OR so the nurses and the nurse practitioners and any of the CRNAs could watch the patients outside the room and have less contact inside, so you had less exposure. The other thing is we did cut a lot of our surgeries, which at Sloan is a big deal because our patients need surgery. Some of their prognoses are reliant on that surgery. So it was a tough decision. And like I said, as a specialty hospital, our priority is to take care of our COVID patients who are infected, but at the same time, we have oncology cancer patients who need that surgery. So it was a really tough decision for our hospital, but we had to do the right thing. The other thing I think people need to be aware of is that like the mortality of a surgical patient who gets COVID is like about 20% higher than the normal person. So you had to take that into account as risk versus benefit at that time. And then we started to make floors that were only COVID. So you would have stable COVID patients, but still COVID positive that needed to be monitored. So we would just take one floor and make it a COVID and try to make other floors just kind of a clean floor in the sense so that less interaction between a positive patient versus a patient who didn't have COVID.
Sure. So in the worst case scenarios, the regular patients that were just receiving typical chemotherapy treatments and things like that, did that stuff continue at all on the clean floors?
Chemotherapy is normally in the outpatient setting. A lot of our physicians, we're such a research-based hospital, which is why we're so well world renowned, is our outpatient clinics for the chemo were still doing chemo, but they slowed down quite a bit. Some of our patients who were maybe on IV chemo were able to be switched to oral chemo for the time being because of the risk of coming in to get chemo. Patients who came in for other issues, maybe infections or potential other issues that are pertaining like progression of diseases and stuff, yeah, that all did still continue. The urgent care clinic did a great job with triaging and making sure that the patients who may not be COVID still get treated. What happened is that when we cut down on our surgery, it created a lot of capacity in the hospital that we normally wouldn't have for both COVID positive and regular oncology patients. So we were able to do both and be successful at that by cutting down on the elective surgeries. We still were running surgeries that were needed to be done. Any emergent surgeries that were life-threatening to some patients, we would still continue. And then some surgeries that were really needed for a patient who needed surgery within a couple of weeks and couldn't be delayed. So things were still kind of running, but not as usual at all, because we needed to cut down on our capacity in the hospital, which we did. The patients were being tested in the urgent care clinic as they walked in, which is like our ER. We don't have a public ER. We just have an urgent care where patients who are sick, who are Sloan patients, can come into. And we were also testing before any surgeries. So if you had a planned surgery that needed to be done or emergent surgery that needed to be done, you were tested before surgery so that we knew where we stood with you before we treated you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Now, just to confirm, when you have a test, even if you don't show symptoms at that point, the test can still come out positive.
Correct.
Strong enough that.
Yes, you can be asymptomatic and still have COVID. Sometimes the viral load might not be high enough, so the test can be negative at the time. And we do see, as it's been shown in data, that there are some tests that have been, false negatives. So that's always a concern. Our anesthesiologists and any of our intensivists, if they did any sort of procedures on any patient, especially in the beginning, who were negative, even if it was like intubation and in the OR, they were treated as if they were COVID positive just for that mere fact. So everyone really did prepare for those potential false negatives. And as a staff, we did too, because we were all nervous. So we always had that in mind. There are certain patients that are always treated as COVID positive just because of their secretions that can potentially expose COVID more than another patient who didn't have as many secretions. Anyone who's trached. So we have a lot of policies and procedures. But as the way it goes in our country, and as I'm sure everyone feels, every day is a different day. And there's different rules that have been changed every single hour, in the hospital, because everyone's trying to get through this together and trying to figure it out. It's very kind of...
Sure. Yeah, I think, a lot of the controversy out there, whether it's this way or that way, it doesn't matter how we look at it. I really, truly believe that we weren't ready for something like this, regardless of however we want to define it now as it stands. We just weren't really prepared for something so big globally. Yeah,
no, we definitely weren't. We just...
Yeah, it's like building a plane while we have it up in the air. Just get it ready.
I think it's something to be said, and I hope that things change after this and we start to live our lives a little bit differently. I know as a nurse practitioner, I appreciate my nurses more than ever now. I used to be at the bedside as a nurse, and my role now is a little bit less interacting with my patients. My nurses are my right-hand man, and they're with my patients around the clock. They're they've been the sole person that's been in those rooms more than I have, I'll have to say. So it's been different being a nurse practitioner during this pandemic. And I think back to being like, what if I was a nurse, and how that would be. Not that I'm not with my patients, and not that I'm not in contact with COVID, and not that I'm not scared or nervous. But you appreciate your nursing staff, and you appreciate, the real role of the nurse. And I think our physicians have really realized that too, along with us. So the teamwork has been great between physicians, nurse practitioners, anesthesiologists, surgeons, and nurses. We created another floor as a complete ICU, and some of our nurses were not ICU trained, and they really picked up quickly. And I have to say they're doing a great job. They're teamed up with an ICU nurse, and everyone's really been on board. All the machines are outside the doors, so it's less contact. But still, it's been challenging emotionally to see these patients in the hospital alone. I mean, sure. I can imagine.
Sure. Yeah. How would you say your day-to-day changed?
It's changed because of my day-to-day. Every day is different. Like, we have at least like 2 or 3 meetings a week, depending on if it's staff meetings with our manager or with our, chief anesthesiologist, or if it's with our critical care department. We had lectures to make sure that we understand how to treat these patients. If we went into the OR ICUs and had to be taken care in there, and how it would work. So every day you would go into work and not really sure, like, are we opening up the OR ICUs? How are our numbers today? You would constantly be listening. Our attendings at the hospital were great. Our intensivists, they would do lectures every day, PowerPoint slides, basically on how the treatment regimen is going. How you would treat them when they're ventilated and on the vent, and different prognoses, different clinical differential diagnoses that you would have to watch out for. And it kind of got scary because you're like, wow, this is really happening. Because the surgeries were slower, we were redeployed to other areas also. So, a lot of us were redeployed to the ICUs. A lot of us were going to just end up going into the ORs, but we were still, teeter-tottering with that. And then a lot of us were still recovering those patients who needed emergency surgeries, or any of those surgeries that needed to happen. So a lot of us have been dispersed, and then we come back together. Some of my coworkers who are immunocompromised, or have some underlying issues, or are pregnant, they were able to be redeployed outside the hospital to be able to remain safe, which was amazing and awesome.
Sure. Up here, like I said, we're in Utica, New York. It's a much smaller area, but we are seeing a lot of cases. And I think there's a lot of misconception about what the reality is, because we are a small area. So I think people have this false sense of security around this happening. But it's happening. We're seeing a lot of cases. I think we have over 200 in my county alone. But given, I think the population of Utica is 60,000 people. So it's quite small. But in any case, where was I going with this? The reality of numbers, when you started seeing it come in, I think the emotional roller coaster that this puts us on, right, is the one thing that makes it hard to believe, because it's like a movie. You hear about it. You think, that won't happen to me. So you have this false sense of security because it's never happened before. We've never exposed, so we don't know what to feel. So then we search for answers, we search for this, and then there's controversy about the media blowing it out of proportion, whatever. I would say, what do you think was your emotional roller coaster that all of a sudden you were here, then you were here, and now you're here? Like, kind of take us through, if you get where I'm going with that, because I feel like we're behind you guys, but we can learn from your share, if that makes sense.
I think at first we're we were skeptical. But we were scared, you know. The unknown is really scary because no one really understood the virus. The virus is still something that is constantly, in terms of clinical aspects of it, is changing, and how we see our treatment working and stuff like that, and how we're adapting to it. But the unknown of, if I get sick and I go home and I bring it home to my children, what's going to happen? The unknown of me potentially being asymptomatic and carrying, and if I go see my parents, like, am I going to get them sick? And is it going to be my fault? But I didn't know I had it. So I think the isolation part of it has been really tough, especially in the beginning, and even now, because you don't want to be that person who causes someone to get sick and potentially be very sick and have some fatality. So that guilt is really much there. Like, a lot of my coworkers have little kids. A lot of my coworkers live with elderly parents. So that became a real struggle for everyone. The anxiety was really high because you weren't really sure how this is transmitted. We're not sure if it's droplet. Should we be wearing masks at all times? Should we be wearing N95s? We didn't really understand it. So the beginning was tough. The other thing is like, I had COVID in the beginning and I didn't know, I was asymptomatic for a little while. And then when I started to get sick, I called out right away from work, but my anxiety was so high because I was like, oh my God, I've been at work for the past 3 days. Did I give it to somebody else? And it was in the very, very beginning. No one really was testing for it. No one really knew about it.
You actually tested positive?
So they didn't have tests at the time. But I'm pretty positive I had it, yes. And I'll probably get my antibodies back. But yeah, the doctor that originally looked at me ended up being positive after he assessed me too. So I was out of work for like 2 weeks, very sick. So I lived my life like I had it. So my mental capacity is like, I'm okay now. But yeah, no, a lot of my coworkers
Do you feel relief? Do you feel relief?
I do, but like it's like nurse like lingo, like we're crazy, like humor.
Yeah. I mean, I said that. I said that to myself even, that it would be great just to have, it's like chicken pox when I was a kid. Like, once it comes through the house, we're good. Like, at the same time, it's very scary. Like, I don't want anyone to have it at the same time, because then what if they get it really bad, And so
all my coworkers are like, you had it. They would FaceTime me like, you have it. Like, I must have down like 4 cough syrup bottles. Like, I was very sick. And, but who knows? At the end of the day, who knows?
Yeah.
Really, who knows? But I guess my whole viewpoint is the guilt I had and the anxiety I had, and this was way before the testings were really available. It's like, did I give it to somebody at work who has to go home to small kids? And that's like the scariest feeling. And the unknown, like, do I have it? Do I not have it? And the availability of tests in New York at the time were very limited. So, and then you get your first COVID case, right? You get your first COVID patient. You're kind of freaking out. You're like, oh my gosh.
Do you remember the person?
Yeah.
Those memories that you have. Yeah.
They actually were tested negative and then they were positive. And so you're like, did they have it when I had them, or, and again, it was way in the beginning. But yeah, you remember your first room you went in, and I don't think it ever gets easier. But again, I think my nurses could really talk more on that. But we're in the rooms like a couple times a shift. But again, the nurses are at the bedside all the time. I think the hardest part for us as APPs, like advanced practice physicians, is like trying to understand the best way to treat these patients and how quickly they turn You'll see patients, doing okay, and then all of a sudden, a couple hours later, they're intubated. So that's the sad part, and that's another part of the roller coaster is you don't know when they're going to turn and how sick they're going to get. And most people do great, so it's not to scare anybody. But of course, the patient population I can speak of is the cancer patient. So some of them are just baseline have other comorbidities, such as cancer, that causes them to get a little bit more sicker. But again, this is happening across the country and at all different types of hospitals. So that's another fear. And the fear of them being by themselves. I think that's really an emotional aspect for all of us, is to see these patients, even if they're coming in for surgery, they are getting dropped off by themselves and they're recovering by themselves. So
I think one of the benefits, because we do live in a more remote area with space, they did for the medical staff at the hospital is that anybody who's home with young children or who doesn't want to come home to their young children, or elderly parents or whatever, they opened up the university student housing and they've been able to stay there. So I thought that was a really nice thing that they're doing for the hospital staff up here, although they just furloughed a whole bunch of them because they're not receiving regular care. Patients aren't going to get regular care because they're scared, right? So the financial...
They furloughed a lot of people.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Wow.
So it'll be interesting. This was announced yesterday. And, as somebody who's also pregnant in the area, who's going to go to that hospital to receive care in the next, 10 weeks, this will be interesting. That's kind of scary, how exhausting that can be. But how I think it just makes it that much more important that we do stay put to not overwhelm the already overwhelmed system now that they're even, less staff. So that's what's happening here.
It's such a different, New York City is obviously so different. And it's so overpopulated that the spread and transmission of the virus is so much different than it would be where you guys are. I think the importance is to stay put. I understand, we want the economy to start running, and there's people who are really struggling financially, and trust me, I hear that. But I think that the seriousness of the virus is there, especially living in New York City, and the fear of contracting it and the fear of transmission is there. And I have to say, like I said, that the worst part, at least for me, is to see these patients alone. I couldn't imagine. And I think people need to really hear that, because, everyone thinks sometimes they're invincible and it won't happen to them. And that's just human behavior, and that's okay. But at the same time, if one of your family members gets sick, you drop them off at the ER, and that might be the last time you see them. And I know it sounds scary, but it's real. And you can't come visit them, I had a patient the other day who wasn't COVID positive, but wasn't doing great. And the husband had asked to come see her. And we made it happen because that was the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that it's even tough for patients who are COVID negative and not doing well, and their families want to just see them because it may potentially be the last time they'll see them, and they may not be able to do that. And that's the realness of what's going on in New York City. It's not to scare anybody. But again, this is just a COVID negative patient who not having issues with the virus, but is being affected by the virus indirectly. So I think that's something just to think about. Most people do well. We have a lot of discharges. We have a lot of great cases, like situations where patients are here, they're in the hospital, they go home, they're doing really well. We have patients, a ton of patients that are positive that don't need hospitalization and stay home.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say 25% of our hospital right now is COVID positive and the others are not. And that's not saying that our patient population is not COVID positive. It's just that they're home doing well and recovering on their own and not needing the hospital. But there are those cases where they need intensive care. And the realness of it is once a patient is intubated, it's hard to get them off the vent and do well. And that's just the truth, at least with the oncology population. And so everyone does need to be safe and staying home and washing their hands and wearing masks. And pregnant women are doing really well, so not to worry. I haven't seen them personally, but I have friends in that department, and they're doing great. They don't have any symptoms whatsoever, and the babies are doing fine. Most of the time. So, but again, it's interesting to hear that people are being furloughed, but it makes sense because a lot of times what they were doing too is they want to keep a clean staff. So God forbid Utica gets hit and then all these employees who are now in the hospital get sick. Then you have that section of employees that were furloughed and hopefully using social distancing that are healthy that then can come into the second wave and help. So it might not be a bad idea to do that stuff because you want a healthy staff, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because staff is getting sick.
That's part of the decision. I haven't heard that theory yet, but I mean, it makes sense absolutely to have almost like the plan B. Should this?
They didn't redeploy the surgical ICU staff and the PACU staff, which we thought we would be redeployed right to the ICU, the medical ICU. Sloan has a different kind of setup, but and the reason being is because they wanted to keep us clean in the sense of less contraction to the virus, so that if we needed to open up our ORs for our oncology population, because that is our population. In Italy, a lot of the specialized hospitals stayed COVID, like clean hospitals. Whereas the oncology or for example, HSS is our neighboring hospital. They closed down the entire hospital and they're taking patients from New York Presbyterian who are completely overwhelmed. And they're taking the COVID negatives and taking care of them. HSS is a surgically driven, most of them are elective cases. So they're utilizing that specialty hospitals for special surgery is what it's called. And they've shut down their ability to reduce surgeries and helping offload COVID negative patients so that they can have their influx of COVID patients come into New York Presbyterian. So that's kind of what other countries have done. So Sloan has kind of been in a niche position. Our job is to take care of our patients who have cancer, but our cancer patients are getting COVID. Sure. So, but yeah, I would say, is everyone social distancing in Utica?
Yes, we are. It's all essential businesses. We are following the same guidelines in New York State. All essential businesses are closed down. If you're working, it's essential. I mean, there's absolutely, there are some people with the mentality, like, these are our rights. We don't want to abide by that. We don't want to wear masks. I get it. I mean, I also see the frustration of people using masks. I see people not using them properly or using them and then touching them to itch their face and move it down past their nose, or even put it, okay, so then they've been out and about and then they get back in their car and they move it down below their nose because they want to be able to breathe better, and then they get out of the car and they put it back up over their nose as if there's nothing on the mask. I need to feel, I don't know, I get it, why maybe they are more dangerous because people don't know how to use them. They should have a nationwide tutorial on how to use a mask properly. I think it would be more effective. But I mean, one of the questions that came in for me to ask you was, is the media being truthful? Are the numbers of deaths and all this in New York City, is it actually happening? And before, we were talking about before even having this call, we don't want to have politics in the call. what I wanted, my intention of this call in general was to shine light on the reality of the stories actually happening from somebody who is firsthand witnessing it. There's no middleman here. There's no media outlet here. This is somebody who's seeing something and saying, hey, this is what's happening. You know, and then people can take that information and use it as they will, right? In my opinion, the numbers aren't really as important for us everyday people to understand. What is important to understand is how this is transmitted. It's highly contagious. The purpose of us staying home is because we don't have symptoms at first, and we can pass it around to lots and lots of people before we realize that we do have it.
I think that it's real. I think that the numbers I can't speak on, because the capacity of tests that you would need to do in order to see these numbers weren't done in the beginning. So we don't know the numbers can be skewed, because if most likely there's a larger number of positive patients compared to the patients that are dying, because a lot of patients, like I said, aren't going to get tested because they're so scared that they just stay home and kind of ride it out. The other part of it is that we didn't test as soon as possible and have the ability to test. Like when I was sick, my hospital couldn't even test me. They weren't testing employees at the time. And nothing against the hospital, we just didn't have the resources. So you could have an employee that was sick and you couldn't get tested, even if you were a healthcare worker. Mm-hmm. Another thing was when I finally did get tested, this is when a lot of the false negatives were coming out. It took 7 days to come back, the result. Even for a healthcare worker, those are the first batch of tests. So when those tests were coming out, what was happening was the 7-day layaway that it took to get the results, they were saying were potentially inaccurate because of how long it took to get that result and how long that specimen was just sitting there, because there was such an influx. And so, like I said, there's a lot of false negatives. There's a lot of tests that weren't done. There are a lot of tests now that are being done, but might not be great. Like we have some patients that were tested and, negative, positive. The most sensitive test we've seen to confirm a COVID positive patient would be a CT scan, and you're not going to do that on every patient. Yeah. So ever. So the numbers I can't speak of, but the amount of overwhelming feelings in Manhattan is real. And the amount of ventilators being used across the board are real. I even had an in-service 2 days ago on we have BiPAP machines, which are not ventilators, that can turn into the ability to ventilate a patient. And we had an in-service on how to do that because we're potentially going to run out of ventilators. And not because we have this increase of patients, obviously the numbers are trending or plateauing, but because our patients are just getting sicker and needing vents. And I think everyone needs to understand too, and I don't know if it's been communicated, a lot of times when a patient's in respiratory distress, they can use something called BiPAP, CPAP, or a high flow nasal cannula to kind of get them over that hump. They don't always have to be intubated. But with this virus, what we've been seeing is that any of those uses of ventilators, non-mechanical ventilators, are causing aerosolization into the air, causing the virus to spread more. So the reason why we're needing all these ventilators is not because we can't use other ways to ventilate a patient without actually intubating them. It's because it causes them to spread the virus load.
Yeah.
Higher. So that's the scare of it too.
Sure. And I think unless you work in that environment, that's something you wouldn't know. I haven't heard that at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that is like the first thing we learned was like, if a patient is on, and this is medical terminology, but like if a patient's requiring a very high flow of oxygen through the nasal cannula, like everyone knows, just a regular nasal cannula, and they're not doing great. Most patients who are COVID negative before this all happened, we could put them on a big machine if that just goes around their face and not have to actually intubate them to help them ventilate and oxygenate. with a COVID positive patient, we are told not to do that. Studies have shown it causes the particles in the air. That's kind of what creates it to become droplet versus airborne. And then you have this whole thing of where they are they in a negative pressure room and stuff like that. So right away, if a patient's decompensating on a high liters of nasal cannula, they're intubated. And so that's why the resource of ventilators are so much higher than usual. It's not because of any other reason besides that. It's just safer. Yeah. So if you're not in the industry, you wouldn't understand that. For sure.
So. Yeah. If you don't mind, I want to take a minute to read that article that you sent me. I actually looked into who this guy was to see like, what is this? But I think it's really awesome. And he's just a nurse. He's not just a nurse. He is an ICU nurse in New York City, and he's young, but he wrote this on his social media page. They pulled it from his Facebook. So I actually found him there, and I just want to read it because I don't think people read enough. They want to read the headline or something really quick. So I just want to take a couple minutes, so bear with me and read this because I think this was really awesome. I'm happy you shared this with me.
I'm glad.
And I'd like to have a conversation with him as well,
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read this. Okay, so the disclaimer is that the words are his own and they reflect only his views and experiences as an ICU nurse. His intention is solely to express his lived experiences thus far throughout this pandemic, and his intention is not to speak on behalf of the hospital of which he is employed, nor the intent to misrepresent the experiences of other nurses here in the city, which I think is a really nice disclaimer he opens it up with, because each person is going to feel different about this situation, including how you feel as a nurse in New York City to a nurse here in Utica, New York. In
mind, which is why I sent it to you. Not completely, but a lot of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yesterday, I considered writing a will. I'm 24 years old, and I'm an ICU nurse in New York City. I am in good health at this time, so I should have no reason to even think about writing a will. But yesterday, I resigned myself to the fact that my likelihood of dying is statistically more plausible than I had previously imagined. When I graduated from nursing program in 2018, I never thought this would be my future with barely 2 years in the field. I thought I was prepared to see my death. I had seen enough of it within my first year in the ICU. Yet, in the last 2 weeks, I have seen more people die than most people see in their entire lives. Now I am not so sure if death is something I am prepared to see anymore. Death is different now. Death could pick me. Last week, a daughter called asking about her mother. She thought her mother's condition was stable. I realized no one had updated her. Things are vastly different now that family is not allowed in the hospital. So I reluctantly but gently told her that if I stopped the IV pump right now, her mother would die. I had to be blunt. Why lie or sugarcoat what is happening? Uncontrollably and unexpectedly, she began to weep. I have osculated the sounds of a dying heart, but never before have I heard a dying heart through the phone. And I stood there awkwardly clutching everything I needed before entering the room, hoping I didn't forget anything while she was sobbing on the phone. Medications, tubes, vials, needles, syringes. My mind races through what I need to do while also attempting to listen to what she might have to say. Every time you go into a COVID patient's room, you expose yourself. So I tell myself, anything you forget that forces you to come back into this room is something that might kill you. I struggle to focus on being human as I stand here in the middle of the hallway, unsure of what to say back. My mask half on and trickle of sweat forming under the multiple layers of PPE. I can't even imagine that. Honestly, I can barely stand wearing it to go to the store for 5 minutes.
You can't breathe it.
Yeah. How do you apologize for not being enough? I have been told I am on the front line, but truth is I am the final recourse. I think that's a powerful, powerful line. I am one of the few who are the last people you want to see, because after us is death. Outside of the pandemic, the ratio in the ICU is 2 patients to 1 nurse maximum. Now the expectation is 3 patients to 1 nurse. In other ICUs and in other hospitals, particularly those in outer boroughs, that ratio is even higher. I am privileged to have just 3 patients some days. Those days break me. ICU nurses are trained to be precise. We medicate, we titrate. Is that how you even say that word? I don't know what that means. What does that word mean?
We titrate like medications in order to keep you alive. So if
Okay.
your blood pressure is low, we titrate up, stuff like that.
Cool. If I was on my own, that would be like my little notebook. I'm like, oh, a new word. Okay. We sedate, we paralyze, we help intubate. We wash your body, clothe you, feed you, and make you comfortable. We enter that room more than anyone else. People have lauded me as a hero, a superhero to some, an angel even. That I am brave and courageous, that my patients are lucky to have me. Most days I feel far from that. Now more than ever, I feel weak and inept. I'm lucky if I even have time to put ointment on your chapped lips as you lay there comatose, moments before I FaceTime your family and they see you for the first time since leaving for the hospital. Breathing tube now in your mouth, feeding, plunging into your nose, a slight drool, and maybe some blood here and there that I just can't seem to stifle. And who am I to steal that sacred moment away from you and your family? Who am I to be privy to the sanctity of that final reunion? It feels like a sin. I am ashamed. But I stand there nonetheless, stricken with shame and bereft of energy because I'm the only link you have to your family at this moment. Sometimes I get so busy that patients lie in their own stool longer than I would like to admit. How do you find time to clean your patient when your other patient's heart rate just reached zero next door? Even when I leave the hospital, I can't escape this plague. The coronavirus follows me home literally and metaphorically. It's on the soles of my shoes, on the clothes as I strip bare at the door, and on my hands as I scrub them red and raw to rid myself of the feelings of filth and decay. It's in the sirens I hear outside wondering if that's the next victim of the virus, and the ping of a text from a coworker who is informing me that our colleague's father just died from the COVID-19. And it's in the ventilator's alarms that go off in my mind even when my apartment is desolately silent. Until now, I never knew the scourge of isolating alone, how the sound of silence could be so deafening. On my days off, I spent hours reading articles, new studies released outside effects of this repurposed medication, benefits of this new trial. The plethora of information is interminable and overwhelming. Yet every day I walk into work feeling like I still don't have enough, or I still don't know enough about this disease. And every day I leave work feeling like I failed. I could have done so much more. It never feels like enough. I don't feel like I am nearly enough. And that's why I tell people not to call me a hero. To me, it feels like a lie. I am a disgrace. I wear guilt like a body wears a shroud. I run around for 12 hours a day, sometimes more if it was particularly busy that shift. Nowadays, I consider myself lucky if I have time to eat, blessed if I have time to pee more than once a shift. I conflate my blessings with my luck. I don't know what to be thankful for anymore. The fact that I was able to eat a full meal unhurried, or the fact that this isn't me on that ICU bed right now. I want people to know that this is beyond difficult. This isn't the world of healthcare I expected to enter. None of us did. I studied to save lives. I signed up to care for the sick and dying, and yes, I acknowledge that this is all at the risk of my own health. But do not misconstrue my choice of profession for a diminished sense of self-worth. I did not sign up to die. I want the country to know that if I end up on the ICU bed, it is because I was not given a hazmat suit or enough PPE to protect me. I want the country to know that America has failed its people, more especially those deemed essential. That I truly believe. We claim to be in the best, the freest, the richest country in the world, that no one else compares to our liberties. So why is that when my shift ends, I peel off the same N95 mask that I have worn for 12 plus hours straight? I have breathed in the stale air all day of a unit rife with the dying. and at the end of those 12 hours, I flinch and wipe my unprotected neck with a bleach wipe, hoping that the thin, easily torn, permeable yellow gown I wear as protection did just enough to stop the virus from seeping into my scrubs and settling under my skin. Until there's a cure or treatment, people will continue to die indiscriminately from this disease. I think that word is good because it's rich and poor. So when people share the information, they try to make it about one thing or another, or a political agenda or another. Rich are dying, poor are dying. Rich people are infected, poor people are infected. It's indiscriminately. I think that's a good word. And even after social isolation measures are lifted, everyone will be still at risk. Even after a peak, there will still be a plateau in downhill journey, and people will continue to die even as we flatten the curve. For a long, long time, the ICUs will still be overwhelmed and the emergency departments will be filled beyond capacity. I want people to know that healthcare in America is broken. We did not prepare enough. New York is a sore example of that. So, you know, I think he shares a little personal part of his parents, but if there's something that we can, I think as people, you know, living day to day, you, with your perspective as a nurse, our perspective as people who know nothing about the medical field and what you see every day, what is something you would share as advice that could help alleviate something like this ever happening in an overwhelmed scenario? Not for Utica, New York in general, but even if like the general population, to prepare for something like this.
I think that it's hard to say, but in an airborne pandemic, droplet pandemic, it's hard because like this isn't the flu. When people compare it to the flu, it's not the flu. The flu doesn't turn patients into ARDS, which is a medical term, but they're not requiring intubation the way a normal flu-like patient would. And the flu isn't transmitted the same way. The difference between this virus is solely because you could be asymptomatic up to 2 weeks and be spreading it. And that's why it's so serious. Education, preventative care. I think that I don't want to talk politics, but our healthcare system in terms of coverage and stuff, making sure everyone has some sort of resources. And then in addition, I think our hospitals should be prepared to go through something like this again. You know, we did a great job, but quickly. But even the smallest things, like our doors in our patients' rooms had to be revamped. So we had windows so that our nurses can monitor the patients through the window. They didn't have windows before, big enough for the nurses to be able to sit outside, monitor the patients through the windows. So something so simple like that made such a big difference for our nurses in order to help protect them. This came so quickly, and there is no vaccine right now, and it's hard to prevent it. But I think at the end of the day, our resources in the hospital need to be considered. Our PPEs, you know, at the start of this, it was scary for us, and our resources were so limited. It's getting better. I can't say it's not. But like he mentioned, the wills, a lot of my coworkers were thinking about writing wills too, you know, who had children especially. I even had a discussion with my family. I have severe asthma. If I got really sick, how long I would want to be on a ventilator. And those are like real conversations that happen. You know, nurses have nursing humor, you know, we keep it light at the hospital. But between us in and out of our shifts, we were so anxious. And we all had our moments of just breaking down. So the severity of where he is versus where I am may be different, but it's all the same. I see sick patients, I see vented patients, and I see patients that are alone, who are paralyzed in an induced medical coma. That's what that means. Or sedated and vented, and they're dying alone. And that's the realistic part of it all. Like that's real. So regardless of the numbers and how many people are dying. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone needs to realize, whether they're a nurse or not, or a first responder or not, that it could be your family member, it could be yourself, it could be your daughter, it could be your son. And just to keep that in mind, because those who don't want to social distance and believe they have rights, which I understand, and I understand it, but you have to remember that I didn't sign up to risk my life either. And so I have rights too, where sometimes I don't feel like I do. If the PPE is, you know, our PPE is limited, and all of a sudden it's like, this is what you're doing, you know, not that we're forced to do anything we feel uncomfortable doing, but as mentioned in the article, I think the hospital system and the healthcare system need to find priority in taking care of their employees at the same time. A lot of employees got sick.
Yeah.
Which creates the downward effect. Like, you don't know if you got it in the hospital or you got it on the subway. You don't know. So regardless of it being PPE issues or not, everyone just needs to be cognizant and considerate of everyone else's health. You know, you and I may not be completely at risk because we're not elderly, but I could go home to an elderly grandparent that I'm taking care of and you have no idea.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, or even cross somebody at the grocery store who you're not even intentionally, you know, you don't know anything about them. And you don't know that they're taking care of somebody and they're the only person available to take care of this one person at their house. You don't know who you cross paths with. And I think that's the idea that I don't have to stop. Okay, that's great for you, but somebody you cross paths with might be the last person available to somebody else to take care of them. And if that person got sick, it's just affecting much more than just one person, you know?
And like you said, some of my coworkers are single parents.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to really take that into account. Everyone is affected in their own way, and everyone has a story. But my coworkers who are single parents, if they get sick and something happens, you know, they feel so guilty because they have to they're their sole provider of their children. And so a lot of people are struggling, and that's why I think everyone needs to kind of be considerate. And I understand the economy needs to get back, and the fear is always going to be there, though. I think we're never going to go back to fully being normal. But I think at the end of the day, we need to continue social distancing until we find a proper plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I almost look at this situation with the medical professionals as, you know, something, if this was a war, if this was military, you wouldn't send them out there without the right equipment, you know, and I feel that we've failed our professionals a little bit with having expectations that they're going to fully function and do everything that they're supposed to be doing on top of whatever regular cases of life are happening without the proper equipment. So if anything, going back to normal is something I hope we don't ever do again. I hope we continue to demand the proper things for the jobs to be done and make sure that people are protected in that sense. You know, I think that we never could do anything 100% because we've never been through this. But I do feel for the medical professionals out there that are seeing things that they've never seen before and they're not prepared for it, you know? So I do thank you for your time doing what you're doing. And even it doesn't matter that you're in a different place and it's much more, you know, urban and a lot more people. The point is that you're really putting yourselves out there, saving lives. Hundreds and hundreds of people that have been discharged and will be able to continue living again, you know, with a sense of health, you know, that they saw fail for a little while, you know.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that I hope that we start to view life differently and we appreciate things that we weren't really appreciating. I think with this time down where everyone's kind of slowed down a little bit, you know, I went for a walk, social distancing the other day, but, you know, I saw people playing cards, like, you know, 6 feet away, but playing cards. And I haven't seen that forever. Everyone's, you know, kind of slowed down and appreciating life. And I hope that people reevaluate how they're living and how they spend their money and what's truly important in life. Coming from this. So hopefully there's a greater good from all of this in some way, somehow, but
I there was a comment today on somebody's social media, how this will be the best thing that's ever happened to people for how they choose to live. And I had the day before yesterday made a comment in somebody's post, how Keeping Up with the Joneses has been a joke on American life and how living beyond their means for so many years, even, and this is not one side of the government, this is both sides. This is all sides, even in government, spending money we don't have. Now we're caught with our pants down, kind of, not ready for this, and including many American families that have been, investing their money before they even had it in big homes and just kind of living well beyond their means, and now really struggling to make day-to-day life okay for their families because they don't have the backup money to sustain during this lockdown or whatnot. So really hoping that people recognize how they can change the way that we've done things a little bit to sustain something like this, so we don't lose what we have. Live under our means a little bit more so we can prepare for this, because ultimately, in the end of the day, I think for any industry out there, failing to plan is planning to fail. And that we are seeing happen, not just in the medical field, we are seeing it in a lot of small businesses. We just weren't ready for this because of the lack of planning. So when we go back to this so-called normal, I hope people really think about what the new normal should look like for them to protect themselves and their families through transitions like this.
Yeah, I think knowledge is power, and the more people educate themselves, the better, honestly. I think as healthcare workers, we get frustrated with social media sometimes because we hear people who might not have read up on a lot of things and don't understand what's going on in the hospitals. And I don't think this should be a political thing. I think at the end of the day, people are dying and people are suffering, and there has to be a solution. We'll figure it out. New York has stayed so strong, and it's so motivating. I mean, even is tonight Thursday? I don't even know. No, tomorrow night at 7:00. They do the cheering every night at 7, but tomorrow night at 7, the entire city will be singing "Lean on Me" instead of cheering for the nurses. It's like yeah, and
I wish if you could get a video and send it to me, that would be so.
Try. I have work at 7 tonight and tomorrow night, but I will try. I think we'll try to go outside and they'll sing it. But so things like that have really motivated us and made us feel supported. But again, everyone needs to do their part, because we didn't risk our lives. We didn't sign up to risk our lives either. And we go home to families too, and the guilt of that is real strong.
Yeah. So. And ultimately, if there's people out there not honoring that that social distancing does work, who they're messing with, I think, really is you guys. Because at the end of the day, that guy said, you're the end of it. And even if they get better or they never even make it to the hospital, somebody that they expose the thing to will make it to you. And so ultimately doing that and not honoring that is a slap in the face to any of the medical workers.
It definitely is. And we are seeing a downtrend, and we are seeing plateauing, and we are seeing flattening of the curve, which has been not solely, but social distancing has definitely helped. More testing has definitely helped, and more education about the virus has definitely helped. But, at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers, and you can read them or not. But I will tell you firsthand, people are dying and could have had many more years to live if they didn't get COVID. And whether it's one person or there's millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people, people are dying. And there's really no number or no justification for that. So, and they're dying alone. Again, I really want to drive that home. There's nothing worse than a family member calling to check on them on their family member, and they're not able to talk to them because they're ventilated. And it may have been that when they dropped them off at the ER, it may have been the last time they ever spoke to them. And that's the reality of things. And I think any nurse would agree with me who's been in New York City, especially, that we're in this together, and
Mm-hmm.
We've adapted and we've learned, and we love doing what we're doing, like we did sign up to save lives, but at the end of the day, we want these lives to not be completely changed forever just because of a virus. Like, we want to stop it, and we potentially want to stay safe too. So
Sure. Okay. Well, I really do appreciate your time, Jen. I know you have to work tonight, and this is why this was a pre-recorded episode, because hard to finally cross paths at the same time. So I know you have a lot going on. I really do appreciate this. I want to make sure you understand. Yeah. And I think the medical staff, anyone tuning in, also appreciates all the medical staff out there doing this, understanding that without that team all over the place working hard on this. So we're thankful. So thank you. I'm just going to say one last thing and then don't hang up yet. So that was my episode now with Jen. Thank you for anyone who tuned in to watch the replay. I am super excited to hear more about next week. We have the Mud Run was canceled, but we still have Dan Williams on. We are going to be talking about the Daniel Barden Mud Fest. It's going to come up on Halloween instead, and some other things that he has going on to make up the difference. Again, Daniel Barden was one of the little boys that was killed in the Sandy Hook shooting. And this has been an amazing fundraiser that has funded a lot of programs now for teens in general. So tune in for that episode. That's going to be Monday night. That's my usual time slot, Monday at 9 p.m. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, where we have some unstoppable people, unstoppable stories, unstoppable you. Have a good night, everyone.